Good morning, 10th grade historians. We're going to continue our look at the Vietnam War with today's topic being the Tet Offensive as the turning point in the conflict. What I'd like you all to do right now is in your historical groups is to discuss with us your activities that you did this past 4th of July. And take a couple minutes to do that now, please.
I swear.
I do.
Yeah, it was hot. Yeah, it was so hot. We just brought our church.
Okay, yes. Who wants to volunteer what they came up with in their groups? Terry, go.
We all went and saw fireworks somewhere,
All right,
except for James' work.
fireworks. James, that's terrible.
Up at the summer camp, I remember because it was like 103 all week long, and we didn't have any air conditioning, and that day we always walked to town with all of our kids and watched fireworks, and it was like the most miserable time.
Yeah.
And then as the fireworks were going, the ski show was going on, we were watching, this front moved in and it dropped like 30 degrees, it was glorious. That's what I
Leah?
remember this.
Voting, awesome. What else do we have here?
Kayla and I had a cookout with our families.
Awesome. So what I'm hearing basically from everybody are constant themes of fireworks, cookouts. Basically, you're resting, you're relaxing. Well, let me transition that to what we're talking about today. What exactly do you think Tet is? Has anybody heard the term other than this context? James?
It's the Vietnamese New Year.
Yes, precisely. It is the Vietnamese New Year. Now, as we can see from these pictures here, fireworks, very big part of the culture. Parades. So basically, you can kind of associate this holiday with the 4th of July in that the celebrating is very similar. Cookouts, parades, you're rested, you're relaxed, a lot of fireworks going on. Now, let me pose a question to you. If you were, let's say, fighting an enemy and they were in the middle of a holiday celebration, do you think it'd be a good time to attack them?
Yeah.
Why? I heard a no. Why do you think no?
Prepared.
Well, when you want to attack them when they're in the
I prefer quality.
That's noble, but
Quality attacks.
Brian, go ahead.
Well, I definitely wasn't, but I know a lot of people in my family on the 4th of July were very inebriated, and to me that sets them up to be attacked very well.
Right. And in Vietnam, Tet was actually designed to be a ceasefire. It was in late January of 1968 was when this attack happened. About 50% of all U.S. and South Vietnamese forces were on leave, were on liberty. They're out in the towns. They're having a great old time. Basically, the guard's down. Now, while this happened, the communist forces, specifically the Viet Cong, which we've discussed earlier, attacked over 100 cities, facilities, and U.S. installations, and the United States and South Vietnamese installations throughout the country at an almost simultaneous time. Now, does anybody know where the majority of the fighting in Vietnam had taken place prior to this? Do you think? What do you think? City, country, on the coast, what? Yeah, out in the jungles. Now, this marked a big turning point in the war because prior to this attack, the American news media, who had incredible access to the American forces in Vietnam, were portraying the war as being fought out in the countryside, the cities are safe, they're basically rest and recreation centers. Well, this marked a big change for it. Now, the attack came as a surprise, but as we can see in the PowerPoint, the United States and the South Vietnamese forces were able to win the battle, and the communists suffered large numbers of killed, wounded, and missing. However, this battle becomes a turning point because of how the American public perceived the war effort as going. Now, as some of you know, reporters were embedded with units throughout South Vietnam, and they had almost unlimited access, so pictures of the attacks began filtering back to the American public, specifically this one. Now, I know it's a very haunting image, but what exactly do you see here? James, go ahead. Josh, my
Looks like someone's about to be executed.
Yes, and in fact, he is.
Ooh.
This was not a bluff. This officer here did pull the trigger.
I was just gonna add that it's publicly executed in the middle of the street.
Right. So obviously, now has anybody seen like World War II movies from like the 40s, the 50s, or 60s? Show of hands. All right. Now, when you're watching those films, how are the Americans or the Allies portrayed?
The Americans are the patriots, they're the heroes, they like come in and save the day.
Right. They're the good guys. They're, defending the hill, shooting from the hip, heroically saving their buddies from the bad guys. Now, this is obviously a South Vietnamese officer and a South Vietnamese soldier to his left, but what do these men look like? If you were to guess basically what their uniforms, their clothing, their weapons, do they look like what you would associate with Vietnamese, or do they look like American troops? Well, they do look like they are Vietnamese in nationality, but this is an American uniform. These are American weapons. It's not very difficult to make the connection between we're supporting the South Vietnamese war effort, and this is a very ruthless conflict that's being fought in the cities, it's in the towns, and that a lot of what the American media had been reported to previously from the generals, from the politicians, didn't match up with what was actually going on in the field. Now, has anybody heard of a journalist named Walter Cronkite? Does that ring any bells at all?
Yes.
Right. Does anybody want to elaborate on who that is? Any ideas? James?
He was a journalist forever and was known as America's most trusted man.
That's correct. Walter Cronkite anchored the CBS Evening News for a large number of years. His credibility in America was through the roof. He, as James accurately portrayed, was known as the most trustworthy man in broadcasting. And Cronkite actually went to Vietnam during the Tet Offensive, and when he came back, he filed a report. It was about an hour-long TV special, and this was a time where there were only 3 main networks on TV. And at the end of his report, Cronkite offered an editorial, which was very rare at the time, and he said the following.
We are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion. On the off chance that military and political analysts are right, in the next few months we must test the enemy's intentions in case this is indeed his last big gasp before negotiations. But it is increasingly clear to this report that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victims, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
All right. So who can summarize what Cronkite told us there in that minute clip? You've been doing great, but I'd like somebody else to participate. Anybody? Ross.
That he thinks that the most accurate representation of Vietnam War is a stalemate right now.
Right, and what does that mean, stalemate?
That neither side is a clear winner or loser at the point.
Correct. So I want you to think about this all as one big puzzle. Now, prior to the Tet Offensive, the American generals, the Pentagon, the government had been telling the people that we're this close to winning the war, victory's right around the corner. The fighting, it's in the hillsides, it's not really affecting the main cities in Vietnam. Well, then all of a sudden, 100 cities are attacked almost simultaneously. Those reports start filtering in. Images like we showed prior of the South Vietnamese officer executing the prisoner began filtering back to the American people. And then on national TV, you hear this. So for tonight, I'm going to assign you to read a news article from February 7th in 1968. And I want you to write a paragraph as a 10th grade student in 1968. And I want you to explain what your feelings of the war would be and just project yourself into that time frame. Thank you. And teacher Moreau. All right, that was teacher-led preview. It's kind of difficult to transition to a topic like in Vietnam because, I wouldn't expect you guys to have a whole lot of background knowledge as to how the war had been going on prior to that. That is a 10th grade history class that's taught at North. One of my friends is currently student teaching in that now. Teacher-led preview, obviously you have a lot of leeway with it, how you want to do it. In the guidelines that I was given, it does reference that you do want to make use of technology, different hooks, and like we talked about in history, in ES 356, like the use of hooking photographs to engage students and to get them thinking about topics is really important. That is why I threw in the very famous photograph of the officer killing the prisoner. And I guess that's it.
Yeah.